Cool. So Dan, can you tell us a bit about your background and journey as a 3D artist and how you got interested in this field?
Just like a lot of other artists, that is something that was part of my childhood. I've always been extremely interested in art. I would always sketch. Instead of doing my homework, I would just create like characters in my notepad. I just didn't think it was a very lucrative business. Let's call it that. I actually was working as a banker initially when I was in my early 20s, and then I realized that this is not making me happy. So I just got to take a leap of faith, and I quit the bank. I started learning 3D modeling, and 6 months later I already got my first job. So it was an instant click for me. So I from the very first introduction to Maya course that I took, I knew that this is it. Like I found my calling, so to speak.
Yeah, so do you have any formal art training, like fine art courses, or are you all self-taught?
I'm pretty much entirely self-taught. So I grew up in Israel. There isn't really an academic path for 3D art, right? You don't have a degree in 3D art or game art. You do have that here, but I only moved here to the States a couple of years ago. So I had to learn everything by myself in Israel. So just a whole lot of YouTube tutorials, a lot of courses. If you don't see it as a job, but you see it as something that you enjoy and you just so happen to make a living out of, then that is how you succeed in something. So pretty quickly, it just turned into my full-time job. And yeah, it's pretty much entirely self-taught though.
Yeah, again, your ArtStation portfolio has got quite a lot of, it's all character focused, of course, but it's quite a wide range of subjects, different IPs, different sort of inspirations there. So yeah, I'm interested why you chose Beth Harmon as a character to create some fan art for.
I didn't even finish watching the season before I got started. I just saw the first episode and jumped on my computer and was like, okay, let's do this. Just her facial features, they're so sharp. I don't think I've ever seen anyone who looked just quite like her. And so this was a perfect fit for me to try and practice doing likeness while also kind of retaining my stylized art style. It was really satisfying because I had a lot of source material from the show, from promotional material of the Queen's Gambit that I kind of drew inspiration. That whole pose with the fingers, it's very memorable and very iconic, and I really wanted to do it in my own style. And I just had a lot of fun with it. I'm really glad I did because it was just a blast.
Yeah, your work's got you don't go very close to realism. Obviously, you've got your style, and I think it is quite unique, and that's one of the things that we like. How do you approach the creative process when developing like a new character, for example, and what sort of specifically inspires you? What draws you to create a character?
Is it a good fit for my art style? Not all characters are going to work great with my art style. It has to be a character that I can play around with in terms of shapes, but also keep them really distinct and recognizable. The next is, how do I make it unique? How do I not make it boring? I don't want to, just a dull pose of a character just looking at at the camera. I want an expression. I want a pose. If you look at some of my other artwork, it's usually there's some sort of a movement going on. There's a little bit of drama. Even with Beth, right? The way that she kind of looks at the camera with her face, you see there's a process going on in her head, and that's what I'm trying to convey in my characters. Something that would pique your interest as a viewer, and I think that's the thought process that I go through every time I pick a new character.
One of the things that really sort of caught my attention, or one thing I thought drew me into that piece of work with Beth, is that it's got that kind of Mona Lisa feel to it. The pose has got that, because you've sort of accentuated the eyes slightly, and it's that kind of it's not a vacant pose, it's kind of pensive, but there's just so much going on. And I think that was one of the things I thought you really captured well, just that there's multiple layers in what appears to be a very simple kind of, it's just someone doing this.
I think with Beth, so usually when I create a character, I think one thing that's unique with my portfolio is that I like to do a little 360. So I actually, unlike a lot of other characters, I sculpt my characters from every angle. It's not just one fixed angle. So even though Beth is the main shot is just her looking like front view, I always look at the other angles as well. And I think with Beth, that was a challenge, just because I didn't have a lot of reference for the back view, or the way the hair works it was not usually the type that, the way I do hair. And I think that is sort of the challenge in creating a character that you don't have a ton of creative freedom with, because you have to make sure that the hair stays authentic and also true to the era, right? But yeah, that's just standard practice. It happens with a lot of my characters that I have to go back and kind of review them. And, the longer you sit on it, the more you start, spotting the errors or inaccuracies. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I always want to make sure that things are as authentic and accurate as possible. But I'm also human, so that isn't always possible. But yeah, it's a process for sure.
In terms of sort of software, what's your picks going through the your typical character workflow?
So ZBrush is my go-to software for sculpting. It's essentially digital sculpting, which is it's pretty amazing, because on one hand it's it feels visceral because you're actually sculpting just like you would in real life, but you have all those tools that make it so much easier. I mean, you have the undo button. You can undo something that you didn't like. You can mirror a model, so you can just work on one side instead of two sides. You have a lot of tools for adding textures and colors, a lot of rendering techniques that I kind of discovered and developed over the past few years that I actually do in ZBrush. It's just second nature, and it's just so much fun. So all the characters that I did for the game were made initially in ZBrush, just in terms of the sculpt. But when you're creating a model for a game, then you have to go through the whole technical process of making it compatible. So you have to take it out of ZBrush. Obviously, you have to take it to Maya, which is where I did the topology, UVs. Then for texturing, I take it to Substance Painter, which is, pretty much, these are all the industry standard software. So I'm pretty used to the whole process, but ZBrush is definitely my favorite part.
We're keen to sort of like give a leg up to people who are kind of like yourself, maybe like looking to get into a career in 3D art, game art, things like that. So what specific skills or qualities do you think they should focus on developing? Any sort of tips you would offer for someone starting out?
Yeah, I get that question a lot by a lot of beginner artists and newcomers to the field who feel like they want to get started on their path, but they're intimidated. They don't really know where to start, and I get it. There's a lot of competition. You open up ArtStation, there's so many incredible artists, and you instantly start thinking, how am I going to even compete? How am I gonna fit in? How do I get hired when there's so many options? The one thing you don't want to be is jack of all trades, master of none. Because if you want to get hired by a studio, you want to excel at something. Most companies are not looking for just someone who's able to do anything. Animation, rigging, VFX. Chances are you're probably not going to be able to do that on the level that a company is looking for. They want someone who excels at a certain field, and then they hire them for that specific position. So you gotta figure out pretty early on what you want to be. I think that's one mistake that a lot of my colleagues used to have back when I took the initial Maya course, is that they didn't know if they wanted to be character artists, environment artists, animators, riggers, VFX artists. So they dabbled in everything, and you get burned out. So just figure out what you want to be. What do you enjoy the most? It's good that you're experimenting, but you got to figure out pretty early on what you enjoy the most. I just went all in on stylized and never looked back.
How do you sort of balance your vision with the vision of a client? Do you just kind of go, yeah, I'll do what you want, or do you take a stance more of like, let's work together, and you clearly are interested in my style, so let's figure out where the middle ground is?
I think the fact that a client has approached me means that they're interested in my particular style. There are a few characters that really forced me to think outside the box and come up with solutions that I never really tackled before. Borgov, for example, there were, some of his facial features and some of his, the clothing also. It's the sort of thing that I didn't really did a lot of before. But that really challenged me to learn new techniques. So I actually enjoy that when a client approaches me and they want to, do something that is maybe, it touches on my art style, but also it expands it. To me, that is the ideal scenario. I think it's always a collaborative process. It's never going to be, it's, my way or the highway. That's not how it works. They have their budgets, they have their visions, they have the art director, and I have to adapt. But the fact that they approached me means that we got off to a great starting point because the art style is already pretty much aligned. It's just about adapting it to their specific project. It always comes down to communication. As long as you're being respectful, then it's completely fine to disagree. It's completely fine to, propose other directions. I'm not just a yes man. Like everything you tell me, like, okay, I'm going to do it, even though I disagree with it. I would politely tell you, this is one path we can take, but have you thought about potentially maybe, going in that direction instead? I think that was the great thing about working with you, Mark, and the rest of the team, is that you were all completely open to suggestions, and I think vice versa. There were a lot of cases where you told me to, kind of go in a certain direction that I was maybe a little hesitant, but I was really glad that I did because I overcame a challenge. So it's never going to be as straightforward. It's not a one size fits all sort of thing. If you reach out to me and you want me to do something that is exactly like a character that I already have on my portfolio, I would be less inclined to accept it because in my mind, it's like, okay, been there, done that. Give me something that would make me a better artist.
So yeah, on that, here's the setup. What was it like working with Ripstone? And do you feel it differed from other studios you work with, or are we all kind of alike?
Horrible. I hated every minute. Ripstone was one of the best clients I've ever had. I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you. Anyone who ever asked me about that Netflix project, as they all like to call it, that's always what I say. Is like, I had such a good time. You mentioned mutual respect. That is one thing I felt throughout the whole process. Obviously, I'm not a magician and I'm not able to get something right right off the bat. And getting your team kind of giving me that feedback and working collaboratively while still being respectful, that is the most ideal scenario for me. So I think that was an actual treat, kind of working with you guys. And I think one thing that makes this project in particular stand out, working with this giant, corporate called Netflix, you have a third party that you also have to kind of appease to or maybe work with, which I think that can lead to a lot of complications in a lot of other cases where there's conflicting opinions of certain things. From my experience, Netflix being there did not diminish my enjoyment at all. If anything, I felt like they were very respectful. I felt like they didn't they didn't put any wrenches in our, in our plans or in our process. They were pretty much on board with what we were trying to do. And I think at the end of the process, looking at the roster of characters that we've created, I'm very happy with where it ended. Yeah, but bottom line, it was a treat. And, I think I feel very fortunate to be able to create a piece of fan art and then eventually have that style being applied to an official game. So it was just a great experience all around.
I personally feel as well that kind of the relationship we had was very much what we had with Netflix. It's like, again, that when you're on a call with those guys and we're talking about the art direction, the way we want to go, 9 out of 10 times they were just like, yeah, cool. You guys are making the game. You know what works. But yeah, I think we found our way forward really, really well with that. So cool. Obviously, you mentioned sort of the 7 characters from the show there. So do you have a favorite, and do you have one that was the most challenging to to get to nail the likeness for. I've got mine, but I'm interested in your thoughts.
Tribal, 100%.
As your favorite?
Both my favorite
Right.
and the biggest challenge. Outside of Beth, obviously. So Scheibel, I think, is definitely the biggest deviation from what you would normally expect me to do in terms of characters. He's just so distinct in his features, both facial features and just the body proportions, his clothing. I really try to convey some sort of stoicness almost, or like a silent, I don't know, like sort of like a quiet personality, very reserved, but also very almost like critical in his way of thinking. And there's a lot of asymmetry with Scheibel. So his eyebrows, his nose is just a little bit, offset. His eyes are a little bit different. His neck and his chin, they're very different from the quote unquote perfect characters that I sometimes make. Going in that direction while still making him appealing, to me, that was a huge challenge. He was actually the first character that we did outside of Beth, from what I remember. To me, that was just the greatest starting point, because that is exactly why I signed on with Ripstone, because that is a challenge. It was just a great character to create.
The thing about Scheibel is he's not very emotive in the show. He is very sort of stoic and static. So yeah, nailing that static pose, it's how you see him 90% of the time. We actually had, here's a little story. We had a bug got sent back from Netflix saying the happy animation for Scheibel looks too angry, and the angry animation looks too happy. And we were like, yeah, if you watch the show, the only time he displays happiness is when Beth beats him.
Yeah.
So we've put that into the characters by flipping some of the animations to try and get more of his character around. And yeah, it was interesting. They're just like, yeah, he doesn't look very happy. It's like, no, he doesn't particularly like winning. But when Beth beats him, he's got that sort of warm glow about him. And yeah, that was a good one. And yeah, so obviously we've talked about it, but yeah, I loved your the hair sculpt video, the tutorial thing you did for Beth Harmon, and also the I think you did, was it a speed modeling or just a tutorial of the Breaking Bad guy?
Oh yeah, Gus Fring.
Yeah, that was your latest sort of thing. Have you planned to do more tutorials sort of relating to your process, and where can we expect those?
Yeah, not specific to Queen's Gambit, but I did put on a new course on Newman Workshop. It's a great 3D school for hair creation. I have a pretty specific process for the way I do hair that I think a lot of people are pretty interested in. In terms of time lapses, that is actually really challenging, creating a time lapse, because sometimes my models take months to create, not because they actually take months, but because I don't have a lot of free time. So I just do them in bits and pieces. And a time lapse has to be like a continuous thing. It's something I enjoy a lot. It's definitely something I would love to do in the future. It's something that you have to prepare for in advance, but I always enjoy doing it. And I think it gives like a behind the scenes look for not a lot of artists, kind of seeing how the process works, as opposed to just seeing the final outcome, which I think is very informative. So I love doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, we can definitely talk about it.
Excellent, great. Yeah, well, that's the end of our questions.
Perfect. Yeah, I had a great time, guys. Thanks for reaching out, and I really enjoyed talking to you. And Mark, I always love talking to you.
Yeah,
And
thanks, man.
yeah,
You too.
we'll be in touch.
Yeah, definitely, man. I think as soon as I can find an excuse to work with you again, I'll be reaching out for sure.
Sure. All right, sounds good.
Cool.